All those things that I will tell you, it doesn't look like there's going to be a kicker, and I get concerned every once in a while that people think the kicker is a solution to long-term problems in Oregon with respect to our ballot budget. I get frustrated. I was appreciative of the last, I guess it was 2 terms ago, when the business community and everybody worked together, so all of the corporate kicker went into a rainy day fund. Boy, that was essential in this last recessionary period. It was very helpful. And we have to thank a lot of people who made that happen. So having kicker reform on the talk and talking about it and then working forward, I'm in favor of that. But we've got to talk to a lot of people, and it's got to be something that we're willing to send out to the people, and they're going to have to vote on. I mean, that's one of those things that has to be changed by everybody else. So the conversations continue to happen in the Capitol. I think there are things that we can do with that, but I will tell you that from my perspective, it needs to be for rainy days and for other kinds of things to balance out the way our budget says. It has nothing to do with that, and I think there needs to be a cap on that at some point so that eventually the kicker would go back if we fill it up and don't need it. So it's a conversation we need to have with all of the people. I think there are plans, but I haven't seen one that's come forward that we really want to take out to everybody and have a conversation about. The legislators continue to talk about it, probably more in the Senate than they have in the House to this point, but it's certainly a conversation that we need to continue to have. What was the second part of the question?
Better way out of the budget through suggestions around revenue reform and tax expenditures.
I think we've done something that, and I want to commend Speaker Hanna on that. We have a tax credit committee for the first time ever. They're going to look at every one of the tax expenditures and tax credits that we have. We passed a bill last session that sunset tax credits, and then they have to be reauthorized if you're going to have them. And so all of those are going to this committee. And then any other tax credit that comes in, they're all piling up in that committee. They will evaluate them to see if they get you bang for the buck, if you do the right kinds of things, if they will produce the jobs that they're supposed to. And at the end of the day, hopefully, we will have some resources that we can say, here's the money you can use to put in order those tax expenditures. And those tax cuts. We need to have those conversations, but I will tell you that many of the tax expenditures that really have a lot of money in them are things like being able to deduct your home loans. And I think they have a social purpose about people about home ownership and things. So be careful when you talk about it. When I've looked at, we've gone through and looked at tax expenditures a lot of times, and they have very little money in them. They aren't going to save the day. Eventually, we've got to make sure, and I think our last governor said it, we have to look at what we're doing as a government, make sure that we prioritize those things that are the most important, and figure out how we can have a budget that we can live on over the next 20 or 30 years. We have to start budgeting, from my perspective, with an eye to the future as opposed to what we've been doing, which is 2-year budgets. And those are the kinds of things that are really going to reform how we do our government. We are going to have some money going into these rainy day funds. They hopefully will help over time, even out the ups and downs of having income tax as our main ingredient for state government. So the conversation will keep going, and I think the fact that we are now sunsetting tax breaks. The other thing that we did last session was we started a website on open books, basically, so you can look at the tax, everything that the government is spending and buying. It was a rough start. There's a new bill that just passed that will add to that. I think eventually we'll put all of the checkbooks open to all of the people. In every state that's done it in the past, the people have looked at it and said, I don't know about this one. Explain it to me. And government has done better with how they spend their money. It's those kinds of things we have to keep looking at. We had a question at the last session about the number of managers to employees, and shouldn't we be looking at that? We are. It's all of those things together that are going to help us move forward in a balanced budget. All of these things we can look at. I'm proud of the things that we're doing. We have another committee that's a joint one on audits and IT to address some of the same problems we talked about here. And they're going to be looking hard at what audits have been done, how they've told us we can save and increase the productivity of the state. Were they done? Did they take the recommendations or not? We've heard some stories already that they did not take the recommendations. How do we get better at doing those kinds of things? I look forward to the kinds of things that we've innovated this session with respect to the committees that we have.
Yeah, Speaker Roblan covered a number of things. I guess first I would point out, when we have a conversation around kicker reform, every time we have that conversation, I like to make sure and step back and say, let's make sure we clearly understand how Oregon is funded. And when Oregonians are working, when Oregon companies are making money, we are flush. And let me just point out, in the last 2 legislative cycles, we have increased spending over 40%. Over 40% increase in spending. And that's in a difficult economic condition. When Oregonians are working and we have good jobs, Oregon is pretty darn flush. Second piece around reform of kicker, in my mind, is simply save first. And we've introduced legislation repeatedly, we've talked about it, we've never quite gotten there, we've made some adjustments, but much like your families, you put money in your retirement, you put money in a savings account for when the washing machine breaks down. Oregon, I think, would better serve itself to put a set aside on general and lottery fund. Just set some of it aside and begin to fill those buckets. We know that having the buckets full helps. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the $100 million to take from the Education Stability Fund. We wouldn't be considering additional withdrawals from the Education Stability Fund because we wouldn't have the money. So the savings is incredibly important. The kicker itself, and I've said this and had to go back and explain myself when I say it because I say often, the kicker, both personal and corporate, is really the only anchor to spending in Oregon. And some of you who are thinking through the math, and I just said we've grown spending 40% in the last 2 bienniums, so well, it must not be a very big anchor, or it doesn't hold against the current of spending. That's it, that goes through my mind immediately. But the kicker does provide some way to say when the revenue forecast exceeds by more than 2%, you're going to get a little bit of that back. Maybe that 2% calculation isn't the right number. Maybe we should give a little more room for error. But the point is, it allows Oregonians some confidence that when we get more than flush, we do have an opportunity to get it back. Speaker Roblan mentioned the tax expenditure piece. Understand, again, this isn't the fix-all. Even though we have assigned this committee and is good, the tax expenditures that will expire just in this biennium, it's only $38 million. And don't get me wrong, $38 million is a lot of money in everybody's mind, but when you're talking about $1 billion hole, fixing that tax expenditure isn't going to do it. The primary items that have been, if you will, of greatest discussion or will end up being the energy, the Betsy credits. And there's now 3 new acronyms, and I'm not sure. Sarah, can you remember all the acronyms? Connie, Jenny, for the and the manufacturing.
We're just not going to call it Betsy.
Okay. Yeah, we don't just call it Betsy anymore. There's 2 or 3 acronyms, but the point is, each of those has proponents around the state of Oregon. I mean, drive out into northeastern Oregon or up the Columbia River and look at all the wind towers that are out there. I mean, it's a significant issue. So this committee is going to be very challenged to say, whatever that dollar number becomes, whatever we decide, here is the expenditure level, which are the most potent job-generating or value-generating items in there. The governor's got the film and tax credit. You know, some things have changed around the nation in other taxing states that give us an upper hand potentially in the film and tax credit piece. But those will be the decisions for that committee to work on. They'll be difficult. I would tell you, if you're out there and considering it, the amount of expenditure on tax credits will shrink drastically. And so I think it's easy to sit here in front of you and say that, and when we finish the legislative cycle, to be correct. We just don't have the revenue to buy back on those credits.
And we have about 25 minutes left and a lot of cards. So I'm going to start reading cards in